Hi friends, it's Mrs. Mayo in your Garden of Learning on another beautiful spring day. And I have a couple stories I'd like to share with you. So now would be a good time to get comfy, cozy. Okay, you ready? This is called The Curious Garden, and it was written by Peter Brown. Oh, I love this. Inside is a little label that says this book was donated to the St. Perpetua Library by Maggie High School in honor of her birthday on February 2nd, 2011. Maggie is Mrs. High School's daughter who went here. You might remember her. She has that beautiful singing voice. She's now a junior at Carondelet. No, excuse me, she's a senior at Carondelet. Thanks, Maggie. The Curious Garden. Once there was a city without gardens, or trees, or greenery of any kind. Most people spent their time indoors. As you can imagine, it was a really dreary place. However, there was one boy who loved being outside. Even on drizzly days, while everyone else stayed inside, you could always find Liam happily splashing through his neighborhood. It was on one such morning that Liam made several surprising discoveries. He was wandering around the old railroad, as he did from time to time, when he stumbled upon a dark stairwell leading up to the tracks. The railway had stopped working ages ago. Since Liam had always wanted to explore the track, there was only one thing for the curious boy to do. Oh my. Liam ran up the stairs, pushed the door open, and stepped out onto the railway. The first thing he saw was a lonely patch of color. Wildflowers and plants were the last thing he expected to find up there. But when he took a closer look, it became clear that the plants were dying. They needed a gardener. Liam may not have been a gardener, but he knew that he could help. So he returned to the railway the very next day and got to work. The flowers nearly drowned and he had a few pruning problems, but the plants patiently waited while Liam found better ways of gardening. I don't think you're a true gardener unless you make mistakes. As the weeks rolled by, Liam began to feel like a real gardener, and the plants began to feel like a real garden. Most gardens stay in one place, but this was no ordinary garden. With miles of open railway ahead, the garden was growing restless. It wanted to explore. The tough little weeds and mosses were the first to move. They popped up farther and farther down the tracks and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. Over the next few months, Liam and the Curious Garden explored every corner of the railway. Look how it's growing. Wow. Look at that gorgeous field of daisies. I see flowers and the delicate, and I do see that moss and the weeds. After spending his spring and summer and autumn with the garden, Liam's time on the railroad was finally interrupted by winter. Heavy blankets of snow fell on the city that season, and for the first time since he became a gardener, Liam could not visit the plants. Rather than waste his winter worrying about the garden, Liam spent it preparing for spring. After 3 cold months, the snow finally began to melt, and Liam rolled his new gardening gear over to the railway. Winter had taken its toll on the garden. But thanks to Liam's planning, his new handy tools, and a little help from the sun, the plants soon awoke from their winter sleep, just like our plants do in the garden, like they're waking up right now during spring. Ooh, isn't that pretty? Before I read it, I love this garden. The garden had always wanted to explore the rest of the city, and that spring it was finally ready to make its move. Once again, the tough little weeds and mosses set out first. They popped up further and farther from the railway and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. The garden was especially curious about old, forgotten things. Sure made that old junk car look a lot better, didn't it? Ah, a few plants popped up where they didn't belong. Plants seem to always do that. Oh my goodness. Others mysteriously popped up all at once. Look how happy he made that person. But the most surprising things that popped up were the new gardeners. Oh my goodness, I see them on the rooftop and down here and on the street. And then look at all the gardeners. Can you see them everywhere? They're tiny, but they're there. Wow. These kind of plants that are shaped into a special shape, that are trained to grow like that, are called topiaries. Ooh, that's another topiary. The gardener's working and shaping it to make it nice and round. Many years later, the entire city had blossomed. But of all the new gardens, Liam's favorite was where it all began. Look at how beautiful the city is. Let's see what it looked like in the beginning. Not a very pretty sight, not a flower anywhere to be seen. And then, because one person grew a garden. One boy's quest for a greener world, one garden at a time. Thank you, Maggie. I love that book. How about one more? And this is Muncha 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 by Candace Fleming and G. Brian Harris. Muncha Muncha Muncha. For years, Mr. McGreely dreamed of planting a garden. He dreamed of getting his hands dirty and growing yummy vegetables and gobbling them all up. Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you that they wrote this book to my Muncha Muncha munching boys, Scott and Michael. But he never once tried it until this spring, said Mr. McGreely. This spring, by golly, I'm going to plant a garden. So he hoed and he sowed and he watched his garden grow. Lettuce, carrots, peas, tomato, yum, yum, yummy, said Mr. McGreely. I'll soon fill my tummy with crisp veggies. We have all those growing in the garden right now except for tomatoes that will be planted very soon because the days have warmed up. But one night, when the sun went down and the moon came up, 3 hungry bunnies appeared. Tippy, 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 Pat. Muncha, muncha, muncha. The next morning, when Mr. McGreely saw his gnawed sprouts, he was angry. So he built a small wire fence all around his vegetable garden. There, he declared, no bunny can get into my garden now. And the sun went down and the moon came up, and tippity, 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 and pat. Spring hurdle, dash, 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 muncha, muncha, muncha. The next morning, when Mr. McGreely saw his nibbled leaves and gnawed sprouts, he was really angry. So he built a wall, a tall wooden wall, behind the small wire fence, and all around his vegetable garden. He huffed, those flop ears will never get over it. No bunny can get into my garden now. The sun went down and the moon came up, and tippy, 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 pat. Dig, scrabble, scratch, scratch, scratch. Spring, hurdle, dash, dash, dash. Muncha, muncha, muncha. The next morning, when Mr. McGreely saw his chewed stems, his nibbled leaves, and his gnawed sprouts, he was really, really angry. So he made a deep, wet trench behind the small wire fence all around his vegetable gardens. Ha! He snorted, those pufftails can't get under it. They can't get over it. No bunny can get into my garden now. I wonder. And the sun went down and the moon came up. Tippy, 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 pat. Dive, paddle, splash, splash, splash. Dig, scrabble, scratch, scratch, scratch. Spring hurdle, dash, dash, dash. Muncha, muncha, muncha. The next morning, when Mr. McGreely saw his chopped blossoms, his chewed stems, his nibble leaves, and his gnawed sprouts, he was furious. So he hammered and blocked, sawed and stalked, drilled and filled, and trapped and locked. And he built a large, enormous thing before the deep, wet trench, outside the tall wooden wall, behind the small wire fence, all around his vegetable garden. I've outsmarted those twitch whiskers for sure, he exclaimed. They can't get through it. They can't get under it. They can't get over it. No bunny, no way, no how can get into my vegetable garden now. And the sun went down and the moon came up, and tippy, 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 stop. The 3 hungry bunnies looked and smelled and touched the huge, enormous thing, and tippy, 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 pat. The bunnies hopped away. We're almost done. You've done a really good job listening. The next morning, Mr. McGreely saw his untouched vegetables. He was happy. I beat the bunnies, he whooped and did a jiggle-wiggle victory dance. Then he climbed over, jumped across, squeezed between, and crawled under until he reached his vegetable garden. Sighed Mr. McGreely at last. Smacking his lips, he picked and pulled up lettuce, carrots, peas, tomatoes, and with his basket overflowing, he reached inside for something yummy. Now it was his turn. Uh-oh, look who's in his basket. Muncha, muncha, muncha. But It looks like a happy ending, like they're all sharing. Mr. McGreevy is sharing his carrots with Tippy, Tippy, and Pat. Well, I hope you liked those stories. I really enjoyed our time together, and until we see each other again, bye.